Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Today I have a layout that I made using the December My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. The collection that I'm working with today is the 49 and Market Peace and Joy collection. I'm very excited to use this collection. It's super pretty. I picked out some items from the ephemera pack, and then I'm also going to be using a beautiful sheet of pattern paper from this collection. So I started off with the items that I chose, the ephemera pieces, and there are also some pieces that I got from the punch out sheet, and I'm inking them with some black soot distress oxide. You could see that for the frames, I inked the inside of the frames as well. You could also see that on the upper right hand side of my mat, I have a photo that I'm going to be using, and I've already put that behind the frame, and that is a frame from the ephemera pack as well. I'm using some of the packaging. I love the 49 and Market packaging. They always have packaging that you could use on your layouts, and so I'm using one of the pieces from one of the packs of flowers, and now here I'm using another one of the pieces of packaging that came with another set of flowers, and I'm using those to back these frames that are going to be part of the layout. The red frame that I use for my photo, that is prominent on the final layout, but these other frames are more like layering pieces, and those are important too, but they just are not as prominent and noticeable on the final layout. Now I'm using a thick piece of cardstock, this is 120-pound cardstock, to back my photo. I have found in the past that when I don't do this, I don't like the look of items that I pop up. Sometimes they look a little flimsy or they bend a little bit. I didn't want that to happen, so I backed the photo with a small piece of cardstock. Then I add some fun foam to the back of the photo, and I'm also going to be popping up my title. The title is "You Are Simply the Cheeriest," and I thought that was a cute title to use with this candid photo that I took. I usually scrapbook older photos since I have so many left to scrapbook, but all of the photos that I use for this month's My Creative Scrapbook kit are from last year. And I was really happy that we got quite a few really nice photos of the girls, and so I was excited to scrapbook those photos. I don't scrapbook chronologically. I keep my albums in chronological order, but whatever I'm in the mood to scrapbook or whatever photos I think go well with the materials I'm using, those are the photos I'm going to use to scrapbook, and that's why I have so many incomplete albums, and that's one of the things that I wanted to work on this year, is going back to some of those half-finished albums and getting them completed. So I have layered up those frames, and I also included some tags. I put some leaves, some florals on top of the photo, and I added some of the beautiful roses that are in this collection. I put some of those into the cluster as well. I'm adding some pine needles from the punch out sheet, and I'm scattering those around the layout. And I do move a lot of things around quite a bit. I feel like whenever I'm making these large clusters, it takes me quite a while to figure out just the right balance for all of the elements. And I find that moving things around even slightly can change that balance. So this part is very time consuming for me. Right now I'm fussy cutting out a border that's on this holly leaf branch, and I sometimes really want the white border and then other times I don't. So I'd rather have the border and be able to cut it off. But I thought that this looked really nice on top of the photo, and I thought it would look even better with a little bit of dimension, so I put some foam on the back of it and added some adhesive and attached that down to the frame. Here I'm adding a layering piece right above the title. In the final layout, you really can't see this card because I end up moving things around quite a bit, and here you could see that I have kind of tightened everything up, and I moved those two clusters of flowers that I had in either corner. I moved those in to be part of the cluster, and I'm also fussy cutting out some flowers, and I'm adding those to the layout as well. And to give the flowers a little bit more emphasis, I pop up two of them, one on the left-hand side of the frame and then the smaller one on the right-hand side of the frame. And I really love all florals. I love decorating with florals, but I really love Christmas florals. And so I was really excited. This kit is just jam-packed with florals. So I had a good time. I kind of went to town with all of the different types of florals on this layout. I really wanted to add that little tiny deer to the layout and that cute bird too. The deer ends up on the left-hand side of the photo. And I'm creating one large cluster here, and it's not attached down to the background. All of the elements are attached together, but since I plan on doing some mixed media in the background, I am not attaching anything at this point. I talk about this frequently. Another reason why I like to attach all the elements together but not to the background initially is because sometimes I feel that the cluster needs to be centered. And when a cluster isn't exactly where I want it on the page, sometimes I feel like that could really detract from the overall look of the page. So that's another reason why I love to make the cluster separately from the background. And there are those pine branches again. They've moved around the layout quite a bit, but now they're going to stay put where they are. And I put the adhesive on the front of the pine needles so that they'll be attached down to other areas of the cluster rather than the background. I use some black soot and I ink up this bow that goes underneath the photo. And off to the right, you could see there are some glitter dimensional flowers. And I was going to use a number of those on this layout, but I decided that I was just going to use this very small blue flower. Now I'm going to be adding some modeling paste to the background. I'm using the stencil that comes with the kit. This is a Vicky Bouton stencil, and I was really excited to get this stencil. I think this is a great stencil to have on hand for winter and Christmas layouts. I want to place the branches so that they come out from behind the large cluster. So I keep placing the cluster on top of the layout, and that way I can see where I should put the branches so that they'll be visible when the cluster gets attached down to the layout. It's a very busy layout and I don't want to have any random elements, so all of the branches are being placed in that same way so that they come out from behind the cluster. Now I'm adding some white splatters. I'm using watered down white acrylic paint, and I'm adding those splatters all around the background. And there are already a lot of white splatters on this background, but I just couldn't resist adding more. It's one of my favorite things to do. And the splatters do go all around the background, but I'm mainly concentrating them on the area that I have put the modeling paste. And as I add the splatters, I rotate the page, and that helps me to get a little closer to the area in the page that I want to put the splatters on, and it also keeps my head from being in the camera. I'm using my Crop-A-Dial to punch a hole in the tags, and then I also add these little, I guess they're almost like page savers. They are little circles with a hole in the center, and I think that adds a nice finishing touch to tags. And to make those, I use a We Are Memory Keepers punch, but you could also just punch a small hole and then punch a larger circle around it and make the same thing. And the tags already come with a hole, just I needed to make the hole a little bit bigger with the Crop-A-Dial because that little finishing page saver that I put on top of it has a larger hole than the tag did. And now I was thinking that I wanted to add a few more pine needles, and of course this is something that I do all the time. I'll add a little bit and then I'll go back in and add a little bit more. I always find some little places that I feel don't look complete. So I'm going back in again for another round of pine branches, and I didn't mention I'm using Liquitex modeling paste for this layout. In some cases, I'm adding new branches, and in other cases, I'm extending the branches. And this stencil is really easy to line back up again. So now finally, it's time to attach that large cluster down to the background, and I put a whole bunch of ATG adhesive, and I position my cluster, and I press that down. And this cluster already has so much going on, but I felt that something was needed right in this spot to balance it out. The kit this month also came with some of the beautiful papers from the Blue Fern Studios Christmas Cheer collection. I absolutely love this collection. I used this pattern paper to punch out some holly leaves. I'm using a Martha Stewart punch and a McGill punch. One has 2 holly leaves and one has 3. And I'm looking for the areas that are green. And now I'm also inking each of the holly leaves with some mowed lawn Distress Oxide. Instead of using pattern paper, you could of course use some plain white paper and ink it, or you could use some green cardstock. I really like the way it looks when pattern paper is inked. I feel that even though you're putting ink on top of it, you could still see the variation underneath, and these Blue Fern Studios papers are really beautiful and have a lot of variation in the background. So I wanted to add some holly leaves all around the cluster. It really didn't need anything else, but I just love to add florals, and I think that these holly leaves are a nice finishing touch. And I also like the idea of adding a little bit of this color green to the large cluster. There is quite a bit of this green on either corner of the pattern paper where the flowers are, so I wanted to have a little bit of that color in the large cluster as well. So I place all of those holly leaves on the cluster, and then I use some gel glue and I attach all of them down, and now I can attach things to the background since the cluster is placed where I want it. And now I'm looking at the layout and thinking that I wanted to add a little bit of bling. There is a lot going on, so I didn't want to add a different color or anything that was going to add to the complexity of it, but I did want to add a little bit of sparkle. So I'm using these really tiny jewels. I believe I got these at a dollar store a few years ago. They're just super tiny jewels, and they come in lines, and I cut them into individual jewels, and I use those to embellish those pine needles that are on the background. I wanted to add a little bit more dimension to the holly berries. I'm using some self-adhesive pearls, and I have a couple of different colors of red, different shades of red, and I also have them in a few different sizes. So I put some glue down because a lot of times these pearls fall off later on, especially the smaller ones. I use the berries that are on the pattern paper and on the embellishments as a guide to where to put the pearls and what sizes and colors to use. I start by putting a whole bunch on top of the photo, and then I also add some to the pattern paper as well, and you could see a couple of other areas around the layout where I've added them. And I like the way it brings in a little bit of a darker color red. I love the intensity of the red in this pattern paper and in these embellishments. It's just such a high quality paper, and I really love that about the 49 and Market papers. The colors are very saturated and rich. Then I was thinking that I should have inked the edges of all of my holly leaves with a darker color. So I'm using some pine needles, Distress Oxide, and not only inking the pine needles, but also inking my fingers, as you could see. And of course, I've already glued these down, and I was able to lift some up, and some I just inked them very carefully while they were still attached down to the page. I pulled a few red bows out of my stash, and I added those to some of the tags. And then I was thinking that I wanted to add a few holly leaves on the berries that are above the frame because I wanted to break them up a little bit. There was a large cluster of those pearls. I'm not sure if the leaves really broke up that cluster, but I do like the addition of them. I think that it adds a nice little detail. And that is the last thing that I add to the layout. Here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Please take a look in the description box. You'll find the link to the My Creative Scrapbook website. You will also find the link to an unboxing video of the limited edition kit for December. I hope to see you all soon. Happy New Year, everybody. Bye-bye.